Welcome back, I'm Captain Xavier, and this is going to be a slightly different video for my LEGO channel. This is going to be a tutorial on how I made the sails for my fleet. Those of you that have been watching along have, no doubt are aware that I have built 7 Napoleonic era warships, and that's a lot of sails. I think altogether it ended up being around 91 sails, and I may end up adding a few more. And that's a lot of sails to make. And so and they all had to be custom made. I only used one original Lego pattern sail that worked for what I was doing, and all the rest had to be custom made. And so I worked out a way to do it, and I figured I would probably get questions on how I did it, so I figured I'd make a tutorial. So here we go. I will show you all of the tools, all of the materials, and the techniques that I used to create mine. And you may end up making little changes here or there, use different materials, that's entirely up to you. This is just what worked for me. For tools, you're going to need a good pair of fabric scissors. Do not skimp on your fabric scissors. These ones were $35, they're Singers, I got them at Joann Fabrics. They are worth every penny. You do not want to try to do this with bad scissors. It will be an absolute nightmare trying to cut canvas with poor quality scissors. You are then also going to want some poor quality scissors because you're going to be cutting a lot of paper and cardstock material, and you absolutely do not want to do that with your good scissors because it will ruin them. You are going to need some kind of a sponge brush, and this tool is going to be destroyed by the end of this, so get a cheap one, it doesn't matter. You are going to need a leather hole punch or similar. Again, I got this one on Amazon. It's got multiple different settings, but I only needed one of them. And you are going to need a pencil. For materials, you're going to need just standard printer paper. This is what you're going to make your original patterns out of. You are then going to need some kind of a heavy cardstock. I recommend cereal box material. This is what I make all my patterns out of for armor, for sewing, for whatever. Because it lasts, and it's really easy to trace around because of how thick it is. So you're going to want to transfer to that after you've made your original pattern. And then of course you're going to need your fabric. I am using a lightweight canvas. It's 100% cotton. I believe it was around $9 a yard, which sounds on the pricey end, but that will make about 50 sails, so that's about 20 cents a sail. So it's a bargain, really. And you're also going to need some kind of a fabric adhesive. I'm using Aleene's Original Fabric Fusion. It works beautifully. Also available on Amazon as well as probably Joann Fabrics. And then you're going to might need tape. You might not, depending on how things work out, but good idea to have some just in case. So the first step, once you have all of your tools and materials, is in fact the most difficult step and the most critical step. If you get this step wrong, every step after that will be wasted because you will have to start over. So that first step is making your patterns, figuring out the shape of your sails. Now, if you're just making copies of existing Lego sails, you don't actually need to do this step. You can skip straight to copying them onto your cereal box material and move on from there. If you're making custom sails like I did, then this is a vital step. Now, the nice thing is if you have original Lego sails to work with, that's a good place to start. That is where I started. Now, I knew none of my sails were going to be exactly the same as most of the square sails. I did end up using this. In fact, every one of my ships have 2 of these sails in them. But I also had larger versions of that. But this is a good place to start because your sails are going to be vaguely like this, unless you're going for even more historical accurate sails, in which case you're probably watching a different tutorial than this. But this is a great place to start. Now you also are going to need your yard arms, so you can figure out exactly the shape that you're going for. So you can work out more or less what the shape of the sail is going to be simply by putting this on your paper and vaguely tracing around it. That will give you roughly where everything is. Try to make sure everything's square, and you can, obviously, you can square this up later. Remember, the bottom ones are supposed to be considerably wider, because that's what gives you the simulated billowing effect. But that'll give you a vague idea of where everything needs to be. And then I use the original Lego sail to clear up the corners. So in order to get that nice corner look, I will use the original Lego sail to trace and also to make the holes. So we'll come down this way. Here's where our bottom corner is. Trace around there. Same on this side. Get that nice swoop in there. Around the corners. Get this bottom corner. And then across the bottom. Clean it up a little bit so you know which lines are the ones you actually want. And that will give you, I don't know how well you guys can see that, there you go. That will give you a basic pattern for your sail. And it'll have the same, angled effects and the nice round edges, and you know where all your holes need to be. And it works out fairly well. You're now going to use your not so good scissors to just cut it out real quick. Doesn't need to be particularly pretty, but try to do a decent job, because you are going to use this to create your more permanent pattern. Okay. There's our basic pattern, and from here you can do more testing. So you can actually make sure, did I get the holes in the right spot? And you're going to test those by using your hole punch. Now, a technique for the hole punch, in order to be able to cut through paper or fabric, because it's designed to cut through leather, it's not meant to cut something this thin and doesn't do a very good job at it. If you put the paper over, or put some of the cereal box material, your cardstock, underneath before you go to punch the hole, it'll then punch a nice clean hole, and you won't have a little bit of the paper still stuck on there. So keep your cereal box scrapped for when you go to punch out the holes in your sails, because you're gonna punch a lot of holes. Each one of my sails had a minimum of 4. Some of them had upwards of 10. I punched hundreds of little holes in order to make all of my patterns in all of my sails. So there is your original test pattern, and now you can test it. Did I make the holes close or far enough apart? Are they too far apart? Does it fit the way I want it to? And we're just gonna put it on there. Put it on there. And sure enough, that will work. I made mine tighter up here than this one came out, but if you like a little bit more billow, that looks pretty good. So that is how you make your original pattern. If you end up make a mistake, you need to alter something. Rather than starting over, what you're going to use is, this is where the tape comes in. Because you can tape over the hole if you need to punch the hole slightly further out or slightly further in. If you need to make the sail a little bit longer, a little bit wider, you can simply add tape to your starting initial pattern. Start with this and just add tape around it. You can use Scotch tape, masking tape, packing tape, whatever you need, duct tape. As long as it's fairly lightweight tape so it'll still bend. The reason we originally do the patterning in paper is it acts a little bit more like fabric than the cardstock does. Plus, This is a lot cheaper, and you can add, like I said, add the tape to it in order to get your exact pattern down. Once you have your pattern exactly the way you want it, then you're going to transfer it to the cardstock. And it's going to be the exact same process. You're simply going to trace around the whole pattern, mark the holes, and then you're going to cut it out using your cheap scissors. I also, when you go to punch these holes, I actually recommend still using a bit of scrap in order to punch that out. Now we're going to skip this step because I have patterns already punched out. So here we have the pattern once it's been cut out and has been punched, and I labeled them so I know which parts they went, which ships they went to. And that is our sail for the permanent pattern. This one is will survive a lot longer, and it's much easier to trace around when you're putting it on the fabric. It's not gonna bend or warp like paper will when you're trying to trace around the outside. So definitely prefer this as my patterning material. Now I mentioned that every one of my ships has at least 2 of these small sails based exactly off the Lego one. Just made an exact copy of this. In fact, here is my cardboard pattern for it. I did make 2 larger ones, one that is simply 2 holes longer, so I simply started the pattern for this and then added a little bit longer, filled in the rest of it, and then I made another one that was 4 longer, and same thing, just filled it in, and it was easy to make different size jib sails doing that. The cardboard one is the one that we're going to use to now transfer to our fabric, and like I said, the cardboard is going to hold up much better and is also easier to trace around. So we can simply put it on a section of the fabric that it fits on, try to use up as little fabric as possible. And I marked with pencil. You could use some other form of marking tool. The pencil is light enough that, or dark enough that I can see it, but light enough that you can't see the residue once you've cut out the sail. You could use a fabric marker, though I don't know how well these sails would stand up to being washed. So, there is our pattern marked onto the cloth. And that is nice and clean. Now, the step that is the big important step, in order to keep the fabric from fraying, because when you cut fabric, you will end up with the edges, you'll end up, the fabric will unravel and you'll end up getting fraying. Even on some, like these older sails, it'll start to happen eventually. You might be able to see it a little bit there on the edge. And this is where our fabric adhesive comes in. Now, one option that some people have done is to just starch the ever-loving daylights out of this beforehand, to just use a spray-on starch and just starch it to no end. But I like the sails to still have a little bit of flexibility, and being rigidly starched, not so much. So instead, I went with a fabric adhesive, and what I'm going to do with it is I am simply going to trace the entire pattern. So I'm going to push the nozzle down onto the fabric fairly hard so that I'm kind of squirting the glue into the fibers themselves, and I'm simply going to follow the whole pattern, doing a loop around each of the little holes to get extra glue there, then going all the way around it, and then all the way around to the edge again. So everywhere that I'm going to be cutting now has a layer of this glue, and this is where your sponge brush comes in. You're just going to brush it in because to one, widen it out a little bit so more of the fabric has the glue on it, but also it'll dry a lot faster when it's not in huge globs, and you don't want the globs anyway. So you're going to wipe that in, and then you're going to let it dry, and this is the tedious part. You set that aside and let it dry. However, since I don't want to wait for it to dry while doing this video, I have already prepared one. So here we have a it's already been glued, the edges are nice and dry, and now we finally are going to use our good fabric scissors, and we are simply going to cut out our sail. And there we go. Minimal waste, very nice. And now, once again, we're going to use our cardstock scrap to punch out the holes. And it is done and ready to install. The edges shouldn't fray for a good long time, and unless there's a lot of abuse, it should look nice and crisp for pretty much ever. As you can see, the pencil marks, I mean, they're almost invisible. You'd have to look really close to see where they are on the side. There's a little bit right there, but very, very much not noticeable, and very comparable to our Lego sale. The weight of fabric I used is a little bit heavier, a little bit thicker threads, but that's just because I wanted that distinctly canvasy look. You could go for something more like a lighter cotton, a muslin or something, and really starch it if you want to get a similar feel from a lighter fabric, or something that's even more similar to the original Lego fabric. But that is how I made my sails. It's a fairly quick process. I was able to make several, almost 100 sails in less than a week while still having a job and doing lots of other things. So it definitely works very, very well if you're making lots of sails. Your patterns will last forever. The materials, like I said, will go a long way. A yard of fabric will would make me 50 sails. A bottle of this also lasted for 100 sails. It's almost all gone now, so I used pretty much all of it making the sails for this fleet. So you're looking at considerably less than $1 a sail, probably closer to about 25 cents. In materials, if you don't really, take into account your cereal box or your, a couple of sheets of paper, but definitely less than $1 a sail. Obviously more if you have to buy all of the tools before, but once you have the tools, not only can you make as many sails as you want using those tools, but you can use them for a lot of everything. Everyone should have a good pair of fabric scissors. And you'd be amazed how often a leather hole punch comes up. Anyway. That is my tutorial. Hopefully this was helpful to some of you. If I did it entirely wrong and you know a better way to do it, feel free to let me know. But given how wonderfully these turned out, I'm fairly confident that this is a decent method. It's easy, it's cheap, and it has excellent results. So there you have it. Thank you guys for watching.